welcome. As predicted, my toddler is now making noise right as we're starting, so
we don't even hear
noise. Okay.
Oh, Pacifica, nice.
Welcome
Oakland.
everybody.
Oh,
Oakland's in the house.
Oh, Shabnam. Representing.
Oh, that's right.
Representing.
Thanks for joining us, everybody, and welcome to the conversation tonight. My name is Bruce Wallace, and I'm the executive producer of Ear Hustle, and very excited to be here tonight with my friends and colleagues, Nigel and Earlonne Woods, authors of the book we're going to be talking about. This is Ear Hustle, and which one of you wants to do the subtitle?
Oh,
This
gosh.
is Ear Hustle.
There's the unflinching stories of everyday
prison life.
prison life.
Yeah, together. It's always a team effort.
Definitely.
And thanks to Sam and everyone else at the San Mateo Public Libraries for having us. We're really excited to be with you all and talk about this book and the podcast. And just a quick housekeeping note, your microphone and video will be turned off, but do please use the chat function, which I believe is at the bottom of your window. Use the chat. That's right. You're using the chat just to chat. And then there's a separate function, the Zoom Q&A, that's at the bottom of your screen. Please send us questions because we really want to get to a lot of questions from folks in attendance. So you just hit the Q&A button on the bottom of your Zoom window. Also, for those who'd like to access the live closed captions of this event, click on the CC and then hit show subtitle. So now let me introduce my colleagues and guests. Nigel and Earlonne Woods are the co-creators and co-hosts and co-producers of Ear Hustle. Nigel is a visual artist and photography professor at California State University, Sacramento. She has exhibited nationally and internationally, and here in the Bay Area, her work is in the permanent collections of the SF MoMA and the de Young Museums, among others. In 2011, she started going into San Quentin State Prison as a volunteer teacher for what was then known as the Prison University Project, and it's now Mount Tamalpais College. And that is, of course, where she met Earlonne. In 1997, Earlonne was sentenced to 31 years to life in prison. While he was incarcerated, he received a GED, attended Coastline Community College, and founded Choose One, which aims to repeal the California 3 Strikes Law, and he's still hard at work on that. In 2018, after 21 years in prison, California Governor Jerry Brown commuted Earlonne's sentence, and Earlonne became a full-time producer for Earlonne on the Outside. And most recently, he also became Ear Hustle's sound designer. So welcome to the two of you.
Bruce.
So the evening, we're going to kind of split it in half. I'm going to start off with some questions for you all about the book. We might even get a reading. It's fun for me to be in conversation with you about the book because my main focus is on the podcast, and I feel like the book has often been kind of off in its own world, and I haven't had that much chance to talk to you. So I'm looking forward to it. But we also want to prioritize everybody's questions. So, half an hour in, we'll start getting to your questions, but please feel free to drop them in as they come to you, and we might even kind of get to them as we go. So yeah, welcome. Let's get started. So I joined the show in 2019, and that was right after Earlonne got out of prison. And I believe the book was already kind of in process, or at least conversations about the book were happening then.
That sounds right.
Yep, definitely. I think we started talking about it probably when I was still in prison. Like one day we're going to write how we were able to navigate the system and create Ear Hustle when usually in that type of environment, they would say no to stuff like that. So we just wanted to write about our experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there were many things that we wanted to do together besides the podcast, or directions we wanted to take the podcast in, including writing a book. But it really did have to wait till Earlonne was out so we could do it in, I think, a more encompassing way. Right? I mean, don't you think it would have been hard to do it while you were still inside? So
yeah,
something that had to wait.
Yes, you probably would think I would have had all the time in the world to write inside, but when we started Ear Hustle, that took like all day to do, inside of a prison.
Well, I mean, one of the other things about writing a book was that we had to be in constant communication about stuff. And when Earlonne was inside, communication was really hard. I mean, we couldn't talk on the phone, we couldn't email, we could only communicate when I was in there. And I mean, we're in a lot of I mean, we are in constant communication anyway, but with the book, it was just like turned up. How much work it was, how much time we spent writing together and editing and working with our editor. I don't know how it could have happened in prison. I mean, you couldn't have been on the phone enough.
No, yeah, and I think we had to, like right now, even trying to sit down and write a book, it might be hectic, but at that time, we had COVID, so it gave us something to do. Not we had COVID, the world had COVID. It gave us something to do during COVID since everybody was on a lockdown.
Yeah, I mean, that's maybe the only good thing that happened during COVID was we wrote the book. It's true.
Right. I wonder how that might have been a boost to like people finally getting to the book writing projects they might not have gotten to otherwise.
Probably, but the thing that was disappointing about that, one of the things I was really looking forward to with writing the book was being able to do more things like this, but in person and meeting more people. And because of COVID, we weren't really able to do that. And so that to me was a disappointment. But anyway, what are you gonna do?
But it did actually end up being, isn't kind of sort of how Ear Hustle transformed during COVID? Isn't that where the book ends, basically?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Dun dun dun. Is Earlonne would do.
Dun, dun.
And,
Yep.
And so was it initial inspiration for the idea of writing a book? Was it really just like, we've had kind of this amazing experience, unusual experience making a podcast in prison, we should let people know that story?
We wanted to do a few things. When we wanted to, on the podcast, we don't talk about ourselves, like how we met, really, what we were doing before the podcast. And so in the book, we wanted to do a little bit of that, introduce ourselves, talk more about a relationship, talk about the struggles, kind of the behind the scenes of how we actually made Ear Hustle, and then go into depth about some of the stories, and actually have some stories in here that weren't in the podcast. So it was all those things. And I think we also wanted another creative challenge to see if we could do it. Like, how do you take a project that is really about sound, and can you translate that to the page? I was just curious about that challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the podcast, we don't talk about Nigel had a little rat as a best friend.
A mouse.
A mouse.
A mouse, very different.
Wait a minute. Wait, which one? How was different from a rat and a mouse?
A mouse is so cute.
I think one is outside and one is inside. See, we would have never known that had we not went on, this little writing a book.
For people who haven't read the book, Nigel, what is the mouse you're talking about?
Oh, so when I was little, I really wanted to be a mouse. And so, I mean, I'm talking when I was little, like 20 or something now. When I was like 5 or 6, I wanted to be a mouse, probably because of Mighty Mouse. And we lived for a while out in the country, and I knew that mice lived in fields. And so I staked out this hole in a field forever, waiting for a mouse to come out. And it finally did. And I was so excited. I went to grab it because I thought we would talk, and it just bit me. And I remember holding my finger up. This mouse was just hanging from it. And I was shocked, and I had to go get rabies shots. So.
Sound like she used to watch Tom and Jerry. She thought it was,
Mighty Mouse.
Thought it was Jerry. Oh,
yeah,
Mighty Mouse.
I did think it would be very friendly. So it's a good lesson. Things aren't always what you think they're going to be.
Earlonne, does that feel like a classic Nigel moment to you?
Classic. I mean, I learned things. I learned about my partner, that she had relationship with a mouse. They was cool. Yeah. They was partners.
Yeah, well, I think that was the other thing about writing the book, is that we got to learn things about each other, even though we know each other really well. We got to learn, charming things and sad things about each other's lives.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, we learned that we both, I knew this, but I learned to what extent that we both have learning disabilities or learning differences, I guess, and both were in special classes in school. So we bond over that.
And you wanted to ask what, you Arlo had worked very intensely for a few years by the time you started working on this book, but what were the things, was there something that you learned about the other person that was the most surprising thing?
Well, the mouse was one. That was the surprising thing. But again, we talked, she talked I think on dyslexia. She talked about, again, us, being in special ed classes, which is crazy. I actually wanted to volunteer to be in a special ed class because they got out early, and I thought that was cool. I didn't know that all the extra stuff came with it, as far as going to after school programs to do tutoring and, so yeah, I hope you learned a lot about me, Nigel.
Well, I think some of the, like I said, we knew a lot about each other, but some of the stories, like when you got arrested for lifting up the railway,
being a good Samaritan,
like being a good Samaritan, you might want to tell that story, and about how scared you were and what happened with your shoe, like little details that bring stories that to life. You should tell that because it's obscure.
So yeah, when I was I think I was 9 years old, I was coming from swimming at the neighborhood park, and as I crossed the railroad tracks, it happened many times where the crossing things go down and the train go by, but they don't go back up. So you have a lot of cars that's just sitting there. And, as a youngster, I just put the thing back up, let the cars go by, and the officers pulled up and told me that, this was illegal and arrested me. Like, no questions asked. Talking about, then later on, it was talking about I was charging the cars $1 to go by. I didn't even have pockets, didn't even think that far out. I was just trying to help the people, and ended up going to jail, and getting in jail. I was so scared. I had a pair of vans and I had to use the bathroom, and none of the officers would come to the door or none of that. And I didn't want to pee on the ground. I peed in my shoe. That's how scared they had me up in there.
And you think that's how they treat a little kid, a 9-year-old. It's it's heartbreaking. So, there were things like that I learned that made me see or learn even more how resilient Earlonne is about things, and how, having those kinds of really formative, traumatic experiences that would derail a lot of people, but didn't really derail Earlonne, or maybe they did for a little bit, but
a little bit. Yeah, I got derailed. I got derailed.
And Nigel, you mentioned sort of part of the inspiration for wanting to write a book was a new creative challenge, and specifically the challenge of we make stories with sound. How do we adapt ear hustle for the page? What were some of those sort of conversations or problems you all had to solve, or solutions that came up as you adapted a podcast? Is it right to call it an adaptation? Or
I think so. So. Trying to, one of the things I really struggled with was sometimes in a podcast, some of the most important things are sounds that people make, like when they inhale, or they're these silences that are really important. And you can't just say in a book, there's a silence, that doesn't have the same impact. And so just figuring out how to write about the silence, or for example, how a silence felt, or how someone reacted, to learn to be verbal about it. And I think that the book and the podcast are really two different experiences. And I don't think you can recreate some of the experiences on the page. I think it's just different. And an example I can think of was we did a story with a woman, Karen, talking to her about what it's like to be married to someone in prison who's serving a really long sentence. And one of the things in the San Quentin parking lot is that I often find underwires from bras, because when you go into the prison as a visitor, you can't have an underwire bra. And so a lot of women are taking them out and they throw them on the ground, and I collect them. And I remember when we were recording her, I showed her an underwire bra. I didn't say what it was. And I asked her, what is this? What's your association with it? And she looked at it, and it took her a minute to understand what it was. And do you remember, Earlonne, when she recognized it, her reaction was so verbal. So trying to figure out how to make that come across in the book. I hope it did. And we tried to use, I see someone in chats, and we tried to do that visually by showing that it was a conversation and not just paragraphs. So I think little tricks like that. And then we also in the book used illustrations, these beautiful pencil illustrations, which I hope helped break up the writing and kind of give people another way to access who we were talking about and what we were talking about. And it goes between in the book, dialogue that almost looks like a script, and then writing. And so I hope that dialogue gave it kind of a different rhythm.
Definitely.
Right. Yeah. I wondered, I mean, every episode we make of Ear Hustle, so much ends up not making it. Some of it breaks our heart when it doesn't make it. Were there things that you tried to make work in the book and it just didn't work and it still hurts your heart?
Bruce, well, Earlonne, do you want to answer this before I do?
No. I was just thinking, like, I think one of the things that I had to realize, when you're writing this book, of course, we're writing it about Ear Hustle, we're writing it about, that life. And I had to try to separate, like, the information from basically not being a memoir or something, to where it just stayed on point. And, I want to say comprehension, but like growing up, that was like one of my problems is like organizing my thoughts, so trying to just keep everything within. And, the subject that we're speaking on was a challenge for me. But no, go Nigel.
Oh, no, you're right. I do remember we kept saying to like, okay, we can say that's for a memoir. That's not for this book. We had to be pretty succinct about our backgrounds. But, I know when we're editing the podcast, sometimes I'm not going to say it gets contentious, but there are passions about editing and things that, and maybe it's mostly on my end that I get really kind of hot about, but I want to keep it in. And in the book, it was probably the same thing. But what's so funny is I can't think of any of those things now. At the moment, you're so like, it has to be in there. It has to be in there. But in most cases, it didn't have to be in there. But it's hard at the time to accept that.
Right.
I mean, with the podcast, I know we go back every once in a while and we kind of like, we tweak something, but they're usually minor. There's minor ones. I can't think of anything where I'm still like heartbroken. But at the moment, it's hard to remember that you're not going to be heartbroken in a week or so.
Yeah, I was just happy that everything was, done and printed out and submitted, and we completed it. That was my happiness. Each chapter.
Yeah. And for writing this book, one thing that was really helpful for anyone who is writing a book, because we're podcasters, we recorded ourselves a lot and recorded our thoughts. I mean, I kept a lot of outlines and we both did a ton of writing, but it was really interesting to just be able to record. And sometimes we would just talk to each other and record that and then make a transcript and edit that. And that made the process, much less painful. I actually don't remember this being painful, but I think a lot of it had to do with recording ourselves and having transcripts to work from. And of course, working together and pushing each other was super helpful. I don't know about doing this. I wouldn't want to do it on my own. Would you, Earlonne?
I can say this for me. One other thing we also had was we had an editor that kept us in line.
Yeah.
So, and that was like a great help for me because like when we go in there and we speak our truth into the microphone and then get the transcripts from that and then outline that to find out what we're going to put in. She was like, well, you can start here. This right here, yeah, move that out the way. So she was there to assist, and I know I needed that. To answer your question, I needed that hand.
Well, it's very much like putting the podcast together.
Yeah,
Bruce, working
definitely.
with you and on edits and stuff. There is people don't always see it, but the editor is huge in helping to shape something. It's really a collaboration.
If not, y'all probably be sitting there forever listening. If it wasn't for the editor, like when they gonna get to the point?
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't realize you all used recordings a lot in the writing of the book. Was it mostly you would, I guess, wonder how you hit on that idea, and then in the book itself, ends up just being a lot of condensed versions of these conversations?
Yeah, I can't remember how we came up, but we certainly for some interviews we did. Obviously, we had recordings, but I think for myself, I just use it as I've kept an audio diary for a long time. So for memories and stuff, I definitely used recordings. And again, like sometimes Earlonne, I would just talk out something and then we would go from there.
Throw it into one of those little systems that transcribe it. And you can do it on your phone, you can do it on microphones, but as long as you got some type of system that'll transcribe, and it seems like a lot of that stuff do it today. But that is an easier way than just sitting down with a pen and a paper or a typewriter and typing it out, because sometimes we think faster. I think way faster than I can type. I'm not.
Yeah, definitely.
I be sitting in meetings and listening to our editors or someone typing. They'd be over there. I'm like,
well, also I think people can be intimidated by the blank page.
yeah.
And talking, once you get used to talking and hearing your voice, it's not as intimidating to just kind of riff, and then clean it up after.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of the work, riff and cleaning it up later.
Yeah. I mean, of course, typing's okay. I don't know how people do it by longhand. I mean, my God, I couldn't keep up with thoughts that way.
Yeah. I have lots more questions, but I did want to remind folks that we want to hear your questions as well. And for anybody who didn't hear at the top, we'd love for you to put your questions in using the Q&A function that you should see right at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Keep those coming, and we'll hopefully get to those in the next 10 minutes or so. I was wondering, also thinking about like working in podcasting and then tackling a book, working in this new format. Were there types of stories or particular subjects that the book gave you license to talk about, or gave you, just the medium was more well equipped for than the podcast was?
Well, Earlonne, I think, do you want to talk about, well, on the podcast, we're very intentional about not being overtly political and letting people come up with their own ideas about things. And I think, Earlonne, that's a perfect segue into what you were able to write about in the book that we've never really tackled.
Right. Like in the podcast, when we started, as y'all know, I was serving a life sentence in prison. So I would have wanted every story to be about California 3 strikes law and what it was about. So being that we, like I say, we did like one story about California 3 strikes law, which was Left Behind, and the sentences individuals were serving. The book was a cool platform to just rip on what I felt about California 3 strikes law and the struggles I had being sentenced under it. So the book did give me that avenue to really express myself
and really talk about the advocacy work that you do,
yeah,
which we don't talk about on the podcast.
Right.
Yeah, I did want to ask you to read a bit of that, Earlonne, but first just talk a bit more, either of you, about why policy and politics and advocacy isn't a natural fit for the podcast.
I think our whole mission since we started this, and it wasn't even like intentional, but it was just our mission was like just to give an individual a story, and for us to pretty much keep it straight down the middle and not take sides, try our best not to lean, hit an individual with our political leanings or lean it to one side. We try. I think we're doing good. We have said some things that that people might not have agreed with, when it came to a particular president, but we definitely we definitely tried to keep it down the middle, and not hammer anybody over the head with our beliefs or our thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would add to that I find it very difficult to follow, reading bills or following numbers. I get very distracted and I feel very outside of it. And so we really wanted to talk about important issues, but do it through storytelling, do it through first person narratives, because I find when you hear someone's story, then all of a sudden I'm really drawn in and I care about that topic. But if I just hear statistics, I can't, it's harder for me to open my heart to it. And so we just decided, like, okay, if that's how we feel, that means that the stories just can't function like that, because we're not going to draw people in. And I think hearing people's voices in the stories does that work. And then we leave the work about policy to those who are the experts in it.
Definitely.
And I think language.
And I think us just say, for instance, Say, for instance, if it was something that I wanted to speak to or some type of policy or something, it has to be in a story where the person is actually living through it, and it's something that's affecting them. And we don't necessarily have to talk about no policy. We just talk about this person experience. That's it.
Yeah.
E, do you want to read a bit from the Three Strikes chapter?
I would definitely read something about it. Anytime I get a chance. Let me excuse me, my lighting is bad, and I have to put on my extra eyes.
No shame in the extra eyes.
My extra eyes. So this is out of my Three Strikes section, because I had a whole chapter on this, and I'll just go from here. I was in Centinela State Prison when I became determined to figure out this law and learn how to get rid of it. Prior to an extended lockdown in 2006, I started searching government codes, similar to penal codes, in the prison law library. They were brand new books because nobody ever checked them out. I had paid a library clerk to photocopy the areas of the book that interested me so that I would have something to study in my cell during the lockdown. I learned that if I wanted to see a change in the Three Strikes law, I would need to take matters into my own hands, or at least try. Back at the start of the 2000s, there weren't many organizations trying to help people get out of prison or putting up any initiatives. Those that were trying to help were doing little more than holding banquets, nothing that moved us closer to abolishing this law. They were taking advantage of hope. In 2004, that hope was reignited with the introduction of an initiative on the ballot called Proposition 26, which set out to demand that convictions be brought and tried separately. That would mean abolishing getting 2 strikes in 1 conviction. We were optimistic that it would pass, leading to our sentences being recalled. Under those standards, my sentence would have been probably 3 to 6 years. For weeks, we all were excited, believing that life sentence enhancements would soon be gone and that we would finally be able to get out of prison, go home, and catch up on lost time. Just prior to the consequential election, the then governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, weighed in, saturating every TV channel with commercials with the headline, 26,000 murderers, rapists, and killers will be released if you vote yes on Prop 66. We were all on the yard talking about how and why these commercials weren't being addressed, with the counter arguments to the classic tough on crime fear-mongering. What made it even worse was that our very own California Department of Corrections, which had put up money in 1993 to get the Three Strikes law established, was campaigning to vote no on Prop 66. This slap in our face, no on Prop 66, was literally stamped on some of their paychecks. They even had posters up in the window facing the yard promoting their position for all of us to see. The night of the election, most prisoners were still hopeful, talking about how this oppressive-ass law was finally going to be amended. For some of those guys throughout the California penal system, the presidential election was a sideshow. All they were thinking about was Prop 66, and things were looking real good. When I went to sleep that night, I did so easily, feeling rather overjoyed, drifting into a dream world. All I could think of was, this struggle is over. When I woke up the next morning, I immediately got word that 5.6 million people had voted yes on Prop 66 and 2.6 people had voted no. It absolutely broke my heart. It was like a bomb had gone off and everybody was walking around like zombies. Almost broke that. And it's a law, Prop 66 was cold. Like, my convictions was from when I was a juvenile, and in 2004 that law would have changed because it would have been only, instead of 2 convictions, it would have been 1, so I would have been able to be resentenced and get out, but we lost.
And Nigel, how about for you? What did the book allow you to talk about, or any treat that couldn't in the podcast?
So I talked, I got to write about my life as an artist and the things that I've done before I started the podcast that made I guess, made me interested in going into the prison. So things that I've done before that sort of prepared me for trying to do a storytelling project inside prison. And I like doing that and talking about my connections to teaching, both inside and outside the prison. Yeah.
Right. Do you want to read something along those
Yeah,
lines?
I'll read something about that. In this reading, I mentioned teaching photography inside prison, which is something I did for almost 2 years through the Prison University project before I started working in the media lab with Earlonne. So I'll mention that in the reading. So this is about sort of feelings and things about going into the prison. Okay. The parking lot is a way station. This is the parking lot at San Quentin. The parking lot is a way station between the inside and out. Correctional officers park there, and so do prison administrators, staff, volunteers, family members, and friends who visit men inside. It's the place where all these people merge, oftentimes leaving evidence of their time at the prison. The parking lot at San Quentin has become my hunting ground, a place full of intriguing, abandoned bits and pieces that have helped me better understand life inside. A crushed tube of bright red lipstick, a Spitfire Skylander card, a flattened spool of string, underwires from a bra, saran wrap braided into a chain, folded pieces of paper covered with mathematical notations, one green glove, a tuberculosis ruler, test ruler, an exploded ballpoint pen, a tiny spiral-bound notebook wadded up and soaked by water, a CO2 cartridge, a bent metal spoon, a Post-it with a list of musicians and songs. Every crushed, crumpled, and discarded object I find out in the parking lot has its own origin story. You can find a worthy story anywhere. It just requires being interested in what is around you, listening and being attentive to what's said and what's unsaid. Before you enter the prison, you go through the Sally Port, where they check your ID. There are 2 sets of gates ahead. After entering and closing the first gate behind you, you hold up your ID for the officer behind the secure window. He buzzes the second door and you step into the prison proper. From there, you pull open a large, heavy metal door with worn edges. The first time I stepped in, I was surprised to be met by the sight of a large rose bush, various plantings, and well-maintained grasses. After years of making this entrance, I usually see the same gardeners I know. They're all incarcerated men who devote themselves to maintaining this area and take rightful pride in it. It seems very pleasant at first glance. To the left is an ominous building with the words Adjustment Center written on it in 19th century script. Next to that is another building, which houses the men on death row. Walking in, I can usually hear guys' voices. It sounds very regimented, not necessarily aggressive, but militant. You don't see these men, you just hear them. Like everything in prison, the sensory messages are mixed. The beautiful garden and flowers to admire, set against the soundtrack of voices of men exercising on death row's yard. The view is lovely, with Mount Tamalpais peeking out in the distance. I've grown accustomed to it, but it always used to surprise me that a prison had such a spectacular view. Walking along the yard, it's usually filled with men working out, talking, and playing music. There are different areas for different races. It took me a while to distinguish who hung out where, but now I can quickly identify the landscape. I can walk through any of those areas as a volunteer, but the men inside respect the divisions. Most people are very friendly. I often hear my name or, "Hey, radio lady," called out. I always make eye contact and at the very least nod my head. If I have time, I stop and chat, but that means it will take me a while to get through the prison yard because guys in prison love to talk. Teaching the photography class gave me an opportunity to spend time in the prison, getting to know people and starting to understand how things work inside. It also gave everyone inside, the men, the correctional officers, and the administration, the chance to get to know me and my intentions. That was so important because understandably, there's a huge trust issue at stake. A prison is a kind of cloistered society with rules and ways of being that were new to me and at times unreal. Understanding how to function as an outsider takes time. You have to learn to respect the racial divisions, the standards for how and when to deal with the correctional officers, and the all-important rule of minding your own business. Navigating a prison as an outsider requires politeness, patience, and persistence. Without those three qualities, you will spin your wheels and burn out.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
It's thinking about or hearing you kind of describe those physical spaces, both out in the parking lot and then as you walk into San Quentin down into the yard, it reminded me both of like, you can do that in a way in a book that you can't do in a podcast. And we actually tried and failed to do it in a podcast 2 episodes ago with 12 Hours on the Yard, which was all about like the physical space, what happens one day in the San Quentin yard. But we had, minutes of sort of like, when you look at the yard, this is over here, and this is over there, and and we tried it a few different ways, and then we finally, it was just so confusing. Nobody listening could actually follow. We just cut the whole thing. Thanks for both of those things. And let's get to some of these questions. The first one I have to get to, which somebody submitted when they registered, it's about libraries. Some of our favorite things. Somebody wrote in to ask or to say that they are a library worker and they're getting a master's to become a librarian. God bless you. I was really inspired by the episode when you mentioned the library in the women's correctional facility. It was an episode we did last year, Catch a Kite, where we answer listeners' questions. And we spent time in the library at California Institution for Women. What is the best way to donate money so prison libraries can get new books? I actually have a link I can drop in the chat because we put this in the show notes. Put this in the show notes for that episode. But I'll grab that now. But Earlonne and Nigel, if you have other ideas.
You see how organized Bruce is? He can just grab a link, just like, I got you, bam.
I know like the San Francisco Library has, and maybe that's the link you're going to drop, has a department, is that what we call it, that works with the jails and prisons, bringing in books. I can say that books are so important in prison and really valued. People read so much and they read deeply. And for a while, we had our Ear Hustle had a way of getting books, and we don't anymore. But I think it's pretty easy to donate books. I think
you can do a couple of things. You can either reach out to any prison public information officer or their CRM, community resource manager. Those two will give you everything you need to know to donate books. Usually they send you some forms, and you will include those forms in the stack of books that you donate to the prison library, and your intentions is for them to go to the library, and I think you can state that on the form.
Yeah, but they're so important in prisons. They're great to donate.
Definitely.
Yeah, and one of the links that's on the page I just linked to is to the Friends of the San Quentin Library, which is this cool, relatively new group that works with a bookstore. I believe it's in Larkspur or something, somewhere near San Quentin. And they basically ask people inside, what books do you want? And then they sort of publicize that. And then people can go in and like buy a copy of whatever book. And Christopher's, I think is the name of the bookstore, will fulfill those. And they've recently started doing ones focused on different prisons in California, not just San Quentin. I think they're just wrapping up one for Ironwood State Prison, which I think is way, way down south, right? And pretty isolated.
Yes.
Yeah, so it feels like definitely very worthy of getting more books down there.
And I would say this, like if you just say, for instance, have just boxes of books that you want to donate, I think most of them have to be soft cover books. And I think the library can deal with hardcovers. I think it's just a little different, but the soft covers are very, they're easy. They're way easier to get in than hardcovers.
That reminds me of, if you don't mind a little digression, we did a story about lockdowns and about how important books were during lockdowns. And do you remember the guy who said, like, he read all his books and he read all his
the magazines, Michael.
Then he went back and read the ads and all the side effects for different things because he wanted to read. So that's how important reading was to him.
Yeah, you just sit there and read every word on the page.
Yes.
Side effects.
Birdbath and lockdown, or
Yes,
Yep.
yes.
Was that what it was?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, for bathroom lockdowns. Yeah.
Side
Mm.
effects
Lockbox,
causes nosebleeds,
Or like box, right?
leg fall off, all kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Sam asks, I'm curious, as Ear Hustle has grown and included stories from many different locations and people, are there ways in which it's actually harder to get access or get interviews now than when Ear Hustle was, quote, younger or smaller?
Okay. That's an interesting question. Is it harder?
Is it harder to repeat that? Is it harder for what?
Basically, as Ear Hustle has gotten more and more of a kind of public presence, more prominent, are there times when that makes it harder for us to get maybe access to particular places to do interviews, or maybe individuals are sort of not interested because of the visibility?
What
Nah,
you're going to say, Earlonne?
no. I'm gonna say I think Ear Hustle makes it easy for institutions or people to say yes, because nothing bad is happening. We're not here trying to get anybody on gotcha stuff, or what they do see is it bring a whole new skill set to their institutions. And what you just asked, someone asked that type of question, like, are other prisons in California duplicating this podcast model? We're sitting here trying our best to make sure that every prison got some type of outlet that gets the marginalized voice out. So I think we haven't touched the federal corrections. I think they're very closed. They don't, so that's kind of hard. But as far as the state prisons, I don't think we have any problems.
No, I don't think so either. Bruce, I'm curious if you can think of anything. I think we've been able to spread out more and go to other prisons since Ear Hustle has gotten bigger. That I think would have been very difficult to do at the beginning. So we've worked really hard to build trust with the administration, both at San Quentin and the headquarters of CDCR. And I think that's just been helpful for us. Yeah.
Well, one thing that occurred to me was just I can't think of instances where it's made it more difficult. I do sometimes wonder if more people come to us, maybe it makes it a little harder to get the kind of interview we want, because I think some people come to us thinking, oh, this is a platform for me to sort of like speak to what I want to speak about. Whereas what we really want to know is just sort of like, what was this experience like for you? How did you change? We don't want like grandstanders or people who are looking for, like a platform.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, we've had to got very clear with people about what we want.
Yeah.
Right. We kind of reference this, but somebody asked about if other prisons in California are duplicating the podcast model.
We hope so.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few that have sprung up, and we're involved in a few as well.
And I know in Corcoran, they have a show. It's more about substance abuse where they're interviewing. It's like an interview show. And me and Nigel got to make our way down there just to give them some type of love.
Definitely. We do get a lot of requests from prisons to help them figure out how to start their own podcasts in California and outside of California. And I think it's really hard to do this. And so I think when people realize how difficult it is, it probably dissuades some of those requests. And there's different reasons. I mean, if people want to learn to just do storytelling and learn those skills and do something, that's great. But I think if the idea is they want to try to do this huge podcast, that's pretty hard.
Yeah, we do. I mean, they often come to me if people just want kind of like people from other prisons want to know how it happened. I'm normally the first person that kind of handles that. I think I talk to somebody at a different CDCR institution every few weeks who wants to start a podcast and find out how Ear Hustle did it. And so far, not led to anything. But we are also actively, as if you listen, you know that we're actively working on setting up a kind of more sustained presence, including like a media center and training program down at the California Institution for Women. So,
yes.
Yeah, hopefully
that's the mission. Both of those prisons. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And mainly, definitely the women prison. We love to set it up in both. I think our 100th episode will highlight some of that.
That's right. Yeah, we're working now both in California Institution for Women and CCWF.
Right.
The
Central Cali, yeah, that's the Central California Women's Facility. Which is fun. It's different. Totally different.
Oh, it's very different. Yeah, that if anybody heard our
different.
last episode, that really illustrates the difference.
Yeah, for us, going into women's prison has been a priority for a while. And that's another thing we couldn't do when Earlonne was still inside San Quentin. There's no way, I mean, that we were going to set up programs outside without him. And so, of course, there's many bonuses to Earlonne getting out. But one of them is definitely being able to go together into the women's prison. And, you know, just like I feel on the outside, women often get, you know, the short end of the stick. It certainly is in prison.
Definitely.
Yeah, so I mean, I feel really actually pretty proud of what we've done at the women's prison and what we'll continue to do. And it's wonderful to hear those different kinds of voices. The last episode we just did about aging in prison, I really think it's maybe our best episode. One, because of the topic being so difficult, but just how different these women's voices were. And Earlonne, I think we were really surprised by the stories there. You know, it's like sometimes I feel like we know so much, but that story was challenging for everyone on the team because it was difficult and we were learning things we didn't really know before.
Right. Yes. No. And I think one of the things is that I never knew. We said it, I think, in the episode. I never knew that going in those institutions, you know, would like just drain everything out of me. You know, seeing elderly women serving time. You know, and I think I even said it like, I never even thought about that. I never even crossed my mind that my grandmama would be in prison doing time.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like and when I seen it, it was just like the elderly men, you know, they on walkers, they on crutches, whatever, you know, wheelchairs. Yeah. And it was just like, wow, this is crazy.
Someone's asking this, Earlonne, about if you have restrictions going into prison. And no, you can go into any prison, but here's a question. How do you feel about going back in, honestly? No, blah, 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 for real.
No, this is no blah, 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 no fluff.
No fluff.
So of course, you know, I always sometimes ask myself, you know, why was I chosen to, you know, be a part of a team that is basically bringing empathy to people in prison, you know? So being that we do this, being that we do the work, being that I'm involved in criminal justice work, you know, I feel it's my duty to go back into the prisons to shed light on either what's going on in society or just for them to see my presence, to say, hey, man, I ain't forgot about you, you know? And Nigel can attest to this. When I go into a prison, you know, I dress like somebody out of magazine sometimes only because it's inspirational, because it was a guy, Sam Lewis, that I seen that was formerly incarcerated. He came in with his suit on and it really inspired me. Like, bruh, you can be doing anything in the world. You can be doing anything, but you choose to come back. So that right there, me having my feelings every time I mean, Nigel can tell you, anytime I go in prison, I get accosted.
Yeah.
by everybody, like, bro, tell me this, tell me that, tell me this. Oh, you look so good, man. I can't wait to get out to put that on. I can't, you know, so.
But do you ever find it draining? Like,
nah, I don't find it draining, because if I feel like I got a headache or I feel like I'm just tired, I could be like, hey, you know what? Catch y'all tomorrow, I'm out. You know what I'm saying? I can walk right back out that door. You know what I'm saying? So knowing that, you know, now when I was on parole, it was different. I used to always think like, what if they just come be like, hey, you got to come with us to add said, you know what I'm saying? But I'm not on parole. I'm off all that stuff. So I go because I understand that it is inspirational. That's why I go.
Yeah. Yeah. So we still obviously do stories in San Quentin. So we are in there working still, although Earlonne and I spend more time working outside the prison than in, which is different. And we're also expanding the team inside. So we have new folks in there that we're working with. And that's also very exciting to enlarge the team.
Yeah, I was laughing in the book when you you talk about, those months around Earlonne getting out and how exciting they were, but also there is sort of some anxiety about what was the connection to San Quentin going to look like.
Yeah.
How would you fill those shoes? And we ended up hiring not one inside co-host, we hired two people behind Earlonne, and Earlonne, of course, had to joke that it took two people to replace him. And now we have 7 people in there. So now there's like 7 people replacing him. But the team, it's going through some cool transitions.
Wow, we got 7 in there? I thought we had 5.
Nope.
Well,
See?
yeah.
So there's a couple people who just inserted themselves.
Don't blink. There are 2 I was just going to handle quickly. One person asked when we're going to interview people incarcerated in Ireland and or the UK. We did make a first journey there last summer and had a great time there, and did some interviews, but I don't think the interviews are actually going to work for our show. So we need to go back. We definitely need to get back to the UK.
But I don't think did they allow us to interview the UK people?
Yeah, we went to.
Oh, we did some on the outside. Yeah, they wouldn't allow us to interview in prisons, but we did some interviews with formerly incarcerated people.
They allowed us to interview in Norway for our Norway.
Right.
But
Right. So UK is definitely still on the list, and we have good friends with the National Prison Radio over there. And somebody else asked us about if we'd considered incarcerated youth facilities, and yes, we have, and we're actively working on 1 or 2 projects that hopefully you'll hear sometime in the next year.
And the youth is tricky because you're dealing with juveniles who don't have the consent, or who need consent from the judge, or so that's the obstacles right now. It's just a little harder, but we're in there. We go to Oakland juvenile facilities, about to go to some other ones, but I mean, we getting opportunities, and when we were in Oakland when COVID hit, so that kind of threw us out of the whole loop, and so. But definitely, you're going to hear one soon.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
I'm glad there's interest in that. That's a good sign. One person in the chat who looks like they've done some volunteering in a prison atmosphere asked Nigel just what that's like for you to maneuver as a woman in a men's prison.
Well, it's interesting. I actually have never had anything uncomfortable happen to me in prison. I had very good training before I went in, and I go in as a professional with specific work I want to do. But I always find, especially in San Quentin, like going in there is like going into a village. A lot of people. People are very friendly. They look you in the eye. They say hello. I've never felt intimidated. And Earlonne knows this. I like men, fair enough. I've grown up with a little bit of consternation about men. I'm sorry to say that, and please forgive me for making these big generalizations, but I actually learned to really respect men and see their complexity by spending time in prison. So I've kind of had the opposite experience, where I feel like I've learned how difficult it can be to be a man, and I have a lot more sympathy. And also in prison, I get to see men being very vulnerable. I get to sort of spy on their friendships and how they operate. So it's given me not just an understanding of life in prison, but a deeper understanding of what it means to be a man. So.
And Bruce, you may not know this, but I got some tape of Nigel. Me asking Nigel about her take on men, and Nigel did not like that many men. Yes.
You have that on tape?
Back in the day.
I have that on tape. That might come up in something. That might come up in some type of something.
We need to get better at saving all of these.
We have a lot of stuff on tape. Boy.
That's the thing. Somebody asked if we keep in touch with any of the people that we interview.
Pretty much. A lot of people definitely reach out, and a lot of people are, happy that they, shared their stories, because, whether it's just, them opening themselves up to something different. But yeah, everybody stay in touch. I think most of the people that then got out are out here doing great, I think.
Yeah, a lot
You
of
know?
people, for me, being a volunteer, I can, I have friendships with people once they get out, not everybody, but I definitely have some people that I met in prison, either students or people in the podcast that I consider friends. I can't really have friendships with people who are incarcerated, meaning I can't write to them or call them. My relationship inside when I go in is, as I said, as a professional colleague. But after they get out, I certainly am friends with a handful of people. And it's great to see them out in the world and doing really well. Yeah.
Yes.
It
Yeah,
is.
she's under different things than me. I can call, they can call me, they can email, they can do all kind of stuff because of my position, and it's different. Totally different.
Yeah, it
But it
is
is
unique
really
of,
fun when somebody gets out and to see them out here and, share a meal together and, just have, do what we do.
yeah, it's like I come from shows that were kind of maybe more journalistic, sort of like straight journalistic endeavors. And there sort of, it's pretty typical to interview people, put the story out, and then really never hear from them again. In fact, and some people even frown on you developing any relationship. But in San Quentin, like you do a story on a person and you see them the next time you go in, there's like no way that you're not going to continue to be in touch with them. In fact, Ear Hustle does make a point of trying to, if we've featured somebody in an episode, get those people down to the Media Lab and make sure they can hear the episode. So often we're listening to the episode with the person who's in the episode, which is really a new experience for me, a special one.
Yeah,
I remember
that. Isn't it fun to I mean, even when it's a difficult episode that maybe it was hard for them, it is really a joy to sit next to somebody and listen with them and respond to it together and then talk about it after. I love that.
No, definitely. I remember when we first started, when I was still inside, it was so complicated to get the podcast played inside. It played outside first. So we had individuals coming up, like, hey man, my family said they heard his Ear Hustle down, da, 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 da. Then, it went from chasing people on the yard to everybody was trying to tell us their life stories, so
That's an interesting dynamic too, that people inside are just really excited for their family to be able to hear them featured in that way, and maybe hear them at all. Just like it's another way that family members can hear the voices of people who are incarcerated.
Yeah. And
after,
I mean, and on that note, you have some people that they may lose a family member that appeared in Ear Hustle, and they just will ask, hey, do y'all have any extra tapes so I can just hear their voice type stuff. So that's very heartfelt when that type of situation come up.
One more question. Do you think that youth should visit prisons as a future deterrent?
Should say that one more again?
Do you think youth should visit prisons as a future deterrent, maybe as a way to sort of?
I shine so bright when I walk in. That right there is a future deterrent. They're like, he out there living a life, if that's what you mean.
No, like kids come in to visit, like.
So like a scared straight mom.
I was about to say my present is definitely a future deterrent for them kids, but I mean for people, but
before they're involved in the carceral system.
Oh, definitely. I'm gonna say this. They have these things in prison. They're called restorative justice circles, right? And you sit in prison and you talk to survivors of crime, you talk to victims of crime, you talk to officials and all that, and y'all all sitting in a circle and y'all have a different understanding of people, right? Because when individuals is out committing crimes, most of the victims are faceless. It's the money or something like that. So I think those type of programs definitely need to be in junior high schools, high schools, because it is a deterrent. It gives you a different insight that you don't have. You don't sit there and see the person, like I say, they faceless. So, to put faces on them, to understand, what you put them through, to understand, or not even to even get to that level, but to just see it. They may not have got to that point, but to see it, I think it definitely will give an individual some type of insight of, that side of life, if that makes sense. But I think it, restorative justice when I was in prison was like, okay, this should be taught way younger,
Yeah, I agree with this restorative justice. I'm not interested in the scared straight model. I don't think that works. But but these restorative justice things are really interesting for anybody to see. One, to think about what happens in prison, but also to think in your own life when you hit difficulties or potential violence, like how can you deflect that? How can you deal with these really difficult emotions through conversation? Such an important skill to develop. Listening and being able to speak your, what's going on, but also really listening to other people. Yeah.
Nice. That's probably a good place to end it. And it is time to end it.
What? Did we?
Yeah,
Fast.
6:30 on the dot. Unless you guys want to, you have anything else you want to talk about? Riff on?
I mean, 7:30, you mean?
Oh, is it? I don't know. I'm so.
You're in Hawaii? Where you at? Hawaii? No.
Oh, this is great. Thank you. And thanks to the library. We're big fans of libraries, and it's always really nice to be invited to speak at a library.
Definitely. It's always fun.
Totally.
Always.
Yeah.
Because that's the one place that I know the people really, really read the book.
Mm-hmm. So thank you all. Thanks to the libraries. And I was asked to remind you that there are more author talks like these coming up. I think Sam has put the link in the chat, but you can go to smcl.org/author talks to see that. And also they would appreciate your feedback. The link for that might also be in the chat. But if you can follow it, it is smcl.org/rate this event and let them know what you thought of the event. And thanks to the libraries and thanks to all of you for all the good questions. And thanks, Earlonne and Nigel.
Yes,
thanks y'all. Definitely, y'all have a great night. And this was fun, as always. This is fun.
Yeah.
All right, see you guys.